Good afternoon. My name is Elisabetta Brunella. I'm the Secretary General of Media Salles. I'm very sorry that I cannot be with you today in Venice, but Media Salles is about to start another training course again for cinema exhibitors in Amsterdam. And the topic of our training course is new technologies for the European cinemas. Today, I'm talking with you exactly about new technologies in cinema, and what I'm going to do now is to give you some background information on cinema digitization in Europe. At the beginning of 2012 in Europe, there were 18,527 digital screens in 34 countries. And this means that Europe has started 2012 with more than half of their screens already passed to the new technologies. 2011 has been a very important year for the transition, as there was an increase of about 80% of the digital screens in Europe. They were about 10,000 at the beginning of 2011, and by the beginning of 2012, these screens have moved to more than 18,000. Where are these screens located? Certainly, the 6 major markets account for the vast majority of these screens. France, the UK, Germany, Spain, Italy, and Russia are the countries where, as a total, about 72% of those screens are installed. Some of these countries started digitization very, very early, such as, for instance, the UK, that for a certain number of years was the most important digital market. Some others started later, but they had a very quick development. For instance, this is the case of France, which now account for about 20% of the total digital screens installed in Europe. As we can say also for many other indicators, digitization has not been so far a kind of homogeneous phenomenon in Europe. In fact, if we consider the penetration of digital screens on the total of the screens installed in each country, we see that there are very important differences. For instance, already in 2011, a couple of countries reached 100% of digital screens. And this was the case of Norway, and also the case of a much smaller country, which is Luxembourg. Considering the other countries, the figures of digital penetration are quite different. Talking about other countries, we see that the penetration rates of digital screens vary quite a lot. And we see that already in the 6 major markets. For instance, in France, 67% of the country's screens have been digitized yet. This figure is equal to 73% in the UK. It goes down to 50% in Germany, to 38% in Spain, very similar to Italy, 39%. We have about half of the screens already digitized in Russia, that has a degree of penetration of 54%. So now we could have a look at the factors that have made 2011 such an important year for digital transition. in fact, as we said before, about 8,000 digital screens were added during the 12 months of 2011. But the key factor in 2011 for digital development has changed. In fact, in 2010, the big impact had been the impact of the 3D movies. So a very high number of exhibitors decided to install digital projectors in order to be able to offer the 3D movies. And certainly 2010 and also partly 2011 have been influenced heavily by 3D. But what is very, very important in 2011 is that many large circuits decided to go 100% digital. And in this process, they decided, in many cases, not to increase or just slightly increase the numbers of their 3D projectors. The other very important factor in 2011 was the availability of a larger variety of business models that made possible to different types of cinemas to have access to the new technology. If we try to analyze more in detail the type of the cinemas that have had access to digital technology so far, we see anyway that only 15% of the small exhibition companies that represent about 64% of the European exhibitors had access to digital technology by 2010. This means that certainly the business models that were available until 2010 or the beginning of 2011 were not suitable to all types of cinema exhibition companies active in Europe. In fact, the model that was used in the majority of cases at the beginning of digitization was VPF, or anyway some adaptations of the virtual print fee model that had been launched and adopted in the United States. And certainly this model by itself was not the right one, for instance, to digitize monoscreens. In fact, in a study that Salles has carried out together with the European Audiovisual Observatory, there was evidence that by 2011, only 11% of the monoscreen cinemas, which represent about 60% of the sites in Europe, had digitized their projection booth. In 2011, it became clear that on the one hand, the tipping point, which is 50% of the digital of the screens digitized, was approaching fast, and it was also clear that other business models had to be adopted in order to allow, especially for the small companies and the monoscreen cinemas, to have access to digital technology. So there was, in 2011, an effort made on on the public sector, in Europe, in order to make available support schemes, either at national or regional level, as well as a European level. I'd like here just to mention, for instance, the scheme launched by the media program, talking about the European level. And talking about the national level, I'd like to mention the Norwegian scheme, which was a kind of a corrected version of VPF. In fact, some public money was added in order to make the VPF model available also for the smaller cinemas or the peripheral cinemas in the country. And another very important scheme at national level was the one launched in France, because it combines a financial support with a legislation act imposing to all distributors to participate in the process of digitization of the cinemas. Another specific type of intervention on the public side was the one that was adopted in Italy, which is based on the principle of tax credit for those companies that invest in digitization. Certainly, the importance of helping the cinemas that so far have not been able to move to the digital technology has become very, very clear, and has become definitely urgent now that the tipping point has been reached, and that digitization is still progressing, especially because those companies that in 2011 had decided to digitize all their screens have completed within the first semester of 2012, or are completing now their shift to the new technology. MediaSal will be publishing new statistics in the next days in Venice, but I can already anticipate that the first 6 months of 2012 have seen an increase in the number of digital screens of about 15%. This increase means that today over 60% of the European screens are digital. The impact of this is that distributors on their side are more and more quitting the 35mm prints, and the switch off, which means the end of the distribution in 35mm, is definitely approaching. And this is certainly not without consequences, especially for the small cinemas and the niche products. These factors certainly may affect the art house sector more severely than the more commercial type of cinemas. In fact, these period of transition, when the larger distribution companies are definitely moving toward digital 100%, and the smaller companies are instead dealing probably both with the 35mm and digital can create growing competitive advantages for major cinemas and for the major exhibition companies, and on the other hand could give less screening opportunities to products that have less commercial appeal or a smaller budget for promotion and publicity. And this is very likely the case of many European films or niche and specialty movies that are normally screened in the art house cinemas. Therefore, digitization can represent an increased risk for the smaller exhibitors and the art house sector, if we consider that in many cases it can be very, very difficult to have access to financing for the digital shift. I wouldn't like anyway to end my presentation on a kind of negative note, and I'd like to share with you some comments that come from the country that was the pioneer in digitization in Europe, which is Norway. In 2011, Norway became digital 100%, but at the same time recorded a very important increase in admissions. In fact, there was almost a 6% increase in admissions last year. When commenting on these results, the representatives of Film and Kino, which is the organization that gathers almost all the cinemas operating in the country, underlined that very likely one of the reasons of these very good result in 2011 had been digitization. In fact, the increase in admissions was not even in all types of cinemas. The increase was more important in the medium and small sector of cinema exhibition, and Film and Kino commented that the largest circuits and the big cinemas could offer to their spectators already before digitization all the products they wanted to show. The figures of 2011 show that the medium-sized cinemas could count on about 30% more spectators in 2011, and that the smallest cinemas in the country recorded even a 50% more spectators. According to Film and Kino, the reason for this increase in spectators was a larger variety of content made possible by digital technology that gave a better access to content also for the smaller cinemas. This is an encouraging sign, especially for the specialty and the art house sector. It was a sign that appeared in 2011. Certainly, we hope it will be confirmed in the future. Our commitment here at Media Salles is to survey and to monitor what is going to happen in the European cinemas that are moving to the full digitization. if you want to know more, just stay in touch with us. We'll publish after our course in Amsterdam a new edition of the Digitalk. Here you can see last year's edition. You'll find there some comments, reflections and figures, and we hope that these tools, as many others that MediaSal is proposing, starting from the website, will be useful for your everyday work. Many thanks for your attention.